Tragedy of WA coast. Diver 35 mauled to death by massive shark while spearfishing with family. A 35-year-old diver has tragically died after being attacked by a massive shark while spearfishing in front of his family off the coast of Western Australia, marking the strait's second fatal shark attack in just 3 weeks. Now let's go beyond the surface and reveal every layer of this story on our AI podcast.
Imagine walking into like a really dense, towering forest that you know is prime grizzly bear territory.
Okay. Yeah, that's intimidating enough on its own.
Right. But now imagine you aren't just hiking quietly on a marked trail, observing from a safe distance. Instead, you're actively dragging a bleeding, struggling side of beef behind you through the brush.
Oh, wow. I mean, you are essentially broadcasting your presence to every apex predator within miles at that point.
Exactly. You're overriding any chance of just slipping by unnoticed. And today, in our deep dive, we're looking at a tragic, tightly packed cluster of fatal shark attacks in Australian waters through that exact lens.
It's a really sobering topic.
It is. We're pulling from a pretty stark, eye-opening article called Shadows Beneath the Surface, Australia's Fatal Shark Encounters. And, our mission today is to unpack why 3 people lost their lives in under 3 weeks.
Yeah, we really need to look at the facts and examine the patterns emerging from this data.
Right, and figure out what it means for you, the listener, whether you're just a casual beachgoer or an extreme waterman. Because stepping into the ocean is, well, it's exactly like stepping completely off trail into the ultimate wilderness.
It truly is an untamed ecosystem. And, the gravity of the numbers we're dealing with today requires some serious, unflinching scrutiny.
Yeah, because we always hear how rare this is, right?
Exactly. Historically speaking, fatal shark attacks are incredibly rare. I mean, you are far more likely to be injured just driving your car to the beach.
Right.
But the source material we're examining details a really alarming density of incidents. 3 fatalities nationwide in less than 3 weeks.
Which is just wild.
It is. When you see a cluster that tight, you can't just chalk it up to bad luck. We have to look past that initial shock and ask, what is fundamentally shifting beneath the surface here?
Absolutely. And to be clear, we aren't here to treat this like some sensationalized movie plot or a horror script.
No, definitely not.
These are real lives, real families, and real communities that are left completely reeling. To understand the sheer immediate shock of this, we really need to look at the most recent tragedy.
Right, the one near Albany.
Yeah. So this happened on a Saturday morning shortly before 11:30 a.m. A 35-year-old diver was fatally mauled by a massive shark. And when the authorities say massive, they're estimating this animal was around 4.5 meters in length.
Which is an animal of almost incomprehensible scale if you aren't used to seeing them up close.
I can't even picture something that big in the water.
To put a 4.5-meter apex predator into perspective, you're looking at an animal roughly the length of a large family SUV.
Wow.
But it's solid muscle, built for explosive speed. I mean, it is an animal operating in an environment where it possesses total physical supremacy.
It's literally in its element.
Exactly. When a creature of that mass displaces water and decides to strike, the sheer kinetic energy involved is just devastating.
And the location of this strike is really important, too. This happened near Michaelmas Island. If you don't know the area, it's a remote but incredibly popular tourist spot. It's known for great fishing, diving, and wildlife. It sits about 13 kilometers off the coast of Albany, which is roughly 400 kilometers southeast of Perth in Western Australia.
Yeah, it's a beautiful, usually serene spot.
But what makes this specific incident so harrowing, just absolutely heartbreaking, honestly, is that this diver was out spearfishing with his family.
Yeah. I mean, the psychological toll of that, it really just cannot be overstated.
Right.
The source notes that terrified relatives actually witnessed the attack firsthand. It wasn't some isolated, unseen event out in lonely ocean. His family was right there.
And they reacted immediately, right? They rushed him back to the Albany Marina by boat.
They did everything they could.
You can only imagine the sheer desperate panic of that boat ride, racing against time. Emergency crews from St. John WA paramedics and local police were literally waiting at the marina when the vessel arrived.
But despite their massive efforts, WA police confirmed he just could not be revived.
It's awful. And now the Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development is assisting with the investigation, and police are preparing a coroner's report.
It's just a profound tragedy for that family and for the whole town of Albany.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit.
Yeah.
Because I want to push back on the narrative that this was just a complete, unforeseeable blindside out of nowhere.
Okay, what do you mean?
Well, there's a crucial detail buried in the source material that really gave me pause. Surfers had reportedly spotted a shark of a very similar size, likely the exact same 4.5-meter animal, near that exact island just one day prior.
Wow. Yeah, that is the piece of the puzzle that changes the entire context of the event.
Right.
It shifts the narrative from a completely random passing strike to an encounter with an animal that was actively patrolling or, at least lingering in that specific hunting ground.
So it wasn't just passing through.
Unlikely. Great white sharks, for instance, are known to investigate areas with abundant marine life. If a massive shark is sighted lingering around a popular reef or an island, it's usually because it's actively assessing the area for food.
So it was hunting. And the ripple effects of this realization on the local Albany community were immediate.
I can imagine.
Yeah, following the attack, officials instantly urged beachgoers, divers, and surfers to exercise extreme caution. The Albany boat ramp was temporarily shut down entirely so forensic officers could examine the victim's vessel.
The atmosphere there must have shifted from a sunny Saturday morning to just absolute tension in a matter of minutes.
Completely. One local fisherman told the media, and I quote, "We saw someone get taken away in an ambulance, and then they pretty much shut the boat ramp."
It brings the harsh reality of the food chain right to the doorstep of a coastal town.
It really does. Another local resident captured the community's mindset perfectly. They said, "We do a lot of fishing in Albany and rarely see sharks. It's terrible, but it reminds everyone that sharks are always out there and people need to be careful."
That quote is essentially the wilderness metaphor you brought up earlier.
Yeah, exactly.
The sharks are always there. They're always patrolling those invisible trails. We just usually don't see them because we operate strictly on the surface while they inhabit the three-dimensional space beneath us.
Right. But looking at the dates, this Albany tragedy isn't an isolated incident, is it?
No, it's not.
This is actually the second deadly attack in Western Australia and the third nationwide in under 3 weeks.
Which is a terrifying statistic.
And just for some historical context, the last fatal attack in Albany was almost a decade ago, in December 2014.
Right, when a local diver was killed spearfishing off Jane's Beach.
Yeah. So going a full decade without a fatality in that town, and then suddenly having 3 nationwide in a matter of weeks?
Yeah.
That is staggering.
It really is. To understand the pattern, we have to look back slightly. Just weeks before the Michaelmas Island tragedy, on May 16th, another fatal attack occurred near Rottnest Island.
Also in Western Australia.
Yes. Stephen Mataboni, a 38-year-old Perth father of 2, was killed while spearfishing with friends.
He was bitten on the leg by what authorities strongly suspect was a great white shark.
Yeah, and again, you have this desperate, frantic race back to shore. His friends were performing CPR on the deck of the boat, doing everything humanly possible, but he succumbed to his injuries.
And the personal context here makes it incredibly hard to read.
Well?
He had just welcomed his second child months earlier.
Oh, man.
And his eldest daughter was about to turn 3.
It is an unimaginable loss for that family. And then, defying all statistical probability, just a week after that incident at Rottnest Island, another fatality occurs on the complete opposite side of the country.
Right, over in Queensland.
Exactly. Michael Jens, a 39-year-old, highly experienced spearfisherman, was killed while diving in the Great Barrier Reef in far north Queensland.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Well, interesting from a purely analytical, investigative standpoint.
Sure.
I was looking at the map of these attacks, and they are thousands of kilometers apart. You have Western Australia all the way over to far north Queensland. Geographically, it makes absolutely zero sense as a cluster.
It really doesn't.
It begs the question, why 3 fatalities right now? Are we just seeing a tragic, random statistical anomaly? Or is something changing in the water?
Well, what's fascinating here is that when you filter out the geography and just look at the actual data points provided in the sources, the common denominator isn't where they were.
Okay.
It's what they were doing. Look at the victim profiles. All 3 of these recent fatalities were men in their late 30s, but more importantly, all 3 were engaged in deep water diving and spearfishing.
Right. They weren't wading in the shallows building sand castles. They weren't even surfing on the surface. They were spearfishing.
Exactly. And to understand why that matters, we have to talk about biology for a second.
Let's do it.
Spearfishing places a human deep into the water column. You are entirely immersed in predator territory, but you aren't just a passive observer down there.
Right. You have a spear.
Exactly. You are an active participant in the food web. You are hunting.
So how does a shark actually perceive a spearfisherman? Like, what makes a struggling fish so obvious to a predator that might be, I don't know, a mile away?
It comes down to millions of years of evolutionary refinement. Sharks have a sensory system called the lateral line, which runs down the side of their bodies.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Yeah, it allows them to detect minute changes in water pressure and low-frequency vibrations. When a fish is speared, it thrashes.
Obviously.
And that thrashing sends out a very specific low-frequency distress acoustic signal right through the water. And remember, water conducts sound and vibration much faster and further than air.
So it's literally ringing a dinner bell.
It is. Combine that acoustic signal with blood in the water, which they can detect in parts per million using their olfactory system, and the bioelectric fields emitted by a struggling animal.
Wait, they can detect electricity?
Yeah, they sense it through these tiny organs in their snout called the ampullae of Lorenzini. So when you spearfish, you are creating this localized sensory explosion that sharks are biologically hardwired to investigate.
Wow.
It completely shifts the dynamic from a chance passing encounter with the human to a highly charged, competitive, high-risk feeding environment.
Okay, I understand spearfishing is inherently risky, but, I mean, people have been spearfishing in Australia for decades, every single weekend.
Very true.
Why are we seeing 3 fatalities in 3 weeks right now?
That is exactly what researchers and marine biologists are actively debating right now.
Do they have any theories?
It's likely not just the activity itself, but the intersection of this high-risk activity with potentially shifting environmental factors.
Like what?
Well, are migration routes for baitfish changing due to ocean temperatures? Are predator populations rebounding in certain zones? When you combine an inherently dangerous activity with an ocean ecosystem that is constantly in flux, the margin for error shrinks to almost zero.
Which brings me to a crucial pivot in this story, because that margin of error is razor thin,
It really is.
and the sources provide a stark, almost unbelievable contrast to these fatalities. Literally one day before the tragedy at Michaelmas Island, we have a story of survival that shows just how wildly unpredictable the physics and the luck of these encounters can be.
Yes, and this requires us to shift our focus from the deep water column back to the surface.
Right.
This involves a 20-year-old surfer named Alejo Santignake. He was surfing on the New South Wales north coast, near a spot called Red Cliff.
He was just sitting there. He wasn't hunting. He wasn't bleeding out fish.
No, not at all.
He was just sitting on his fiberglass board, waiting for a wave, and suddenly, from below, a shark grabs his foot.
Terrifying.
His account of the incident is absolutely horrifying.
Yeah.
He posted on social media shortly after saying, "A shark had bitten me. It pulled me into the water, and my immediate response was to kick it as hard as I could to make it let go."
I mean, that is the ultimate primal fight-or-flight response triggered in just a fraction of a second. But what actually saved his life involves a complex mix of adrenaline, pure luck, and the physical mechanics of the gear he was using.
Oh, the leash, right?
Yeah, during the frantic struggle, the shark actually became tangled in his surfboard leash.
Wait, his leash? Like the little cord attaching his ankle to the board?
Yes, and this is where the physics of the environment become crucial.
How so?
When you are on a surfboard, you have buoyancy. You're operating on a two-dimensional plane right at the surface of the water. When the shark grabbed Alejo, the extreme buoyancy of the foam board pulling upward, combined with the immense tension of that urethane leash stretching, essentially created a chaotic, confusing tug of war.
Wow, I never would have thought of that.
Yeah, it disrupted the shark's ability to pull him under or perform a clean bite and release. The tangling caused enough physical resistance that the shark eventually just broke free from the board and swam off.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
So his friends rushed in, pulling him to shore, and they actually applied a tourniquet to his leg before paramedics even arrived.
Which is just unbelievable quick thinking under pressure.
Totally. It probably saved him from bleeding out. He had to undergo surgery for the injuries to his foot. The bite tore through skin and muscle, ruptured a tendon, and damaged a few others.
But crucially, miraculously, the teeth missed his major arteries.
Thank goodness.
As is so often the case in these encounters, a matter of mere millimeters made the difference between a hospital stay and a fatal outcome.
So what does this all mean? Alejo himself seemed to understand the gravity of it.
Oh, for sure.
He said, "Considering what could have happened, I was very lucky. Looking at how serious shark attacks can be, I know I got off lightly.
It's a very mature perspective for a 20-year-old.
It really is. And
Yeah.
when I read that, the physical contrast is what really hits me. If you're a casual beachgoer listening to this is the part where you might be terrified to ever step foot in the ocean again.
Naturally.
But there is a massive distinction between what happened to Alejo and what happens to a spearfisherman.
Absolutely. There is a fundamental difference in vulnerability.
Exactly. Alejo is a surfer on the surface. He gets bitten, but he has the leverage of the air and the water surface to kick back. He has a floating board that acts as a physical barrier.
And a flotation device.
Right. He has a leash that accidentally acts as the deterrent. He has visibility of the shore, and he has gravity on his side to get pulled out of the water quickly by his friends.
Now compare that to the sheer, isolating vulnerability of a spearfisherman.
It's night and day.
Completely. When you are submerged 10, 15, or 20 meters down, fighting a 4.5-meter apex predator in its own three-dimensional domain, you have absolutely zero leverage.
None.
The shark can strike from below, from above, from behind, without any surface boundary to restrict its movements. You have no solid surface to brace against, and you have no instant retreat to the air.
You're just floating there.
You are entirely enveloped in the predator's element, holding your breath while carrying the very bait that brought it there.
Wow. If we connect this to the bigger picture.
It entirely explains why this recent string of events has so intensely reignited the debate around shark safety and human behavior in Australian waters.
Right.
The discussion isn't really about putting up shark nets for tourists wading in knee-deep water. It is heavily focused on those who willingly enter offshore areas known for large predators.
Right. Specifically to engage in activities like diving and spearfishing.
Exactly. The risks are inherently biologically different from typical beach activities, and the debate is centering on whether individuals fully comprehend the shifting odds when they trigger those sensory cues in a high-risk environment.
It's a deeply sobering reality check. Because for you, the listener, whether you're a casual beachgoer who just likes to splash in the shallows on a family vacation, an avid surfer waiting for the next set, or a hardcore diver prepping your spear gear for the weekend, these sources serve as a profound reminder.
They really do.
The ocean is not a swimming pool. It's not a manicured, controlled environment built for our recreation. It's a massive, wild, deeply complex ecosystem governed by its own apex predators. And understanding the specific risks of what you're doing out there, how the acoustics of spearfishing differ from the buoyancy of surfing, how the vulnerability of deep water differs from the safety of the shallows, it's absolutely crucial before you ever get your feet wet.
I echo that entirely. Knowledge, situational awareness, and a deep respect for the biology of the ocean are our best, and sometimes only, tools.
Well said.
The ocean demands immense respect. By looking at all these different perspectives, from the grieving locals at the Albany marina to the data showing a cluster of spearfishing incidents to the visceral mechanical account of a lucky survivor like Alejo, we gain a much fuller, albeit heavier, picture of what it truly means to coexist with these magnificent, terrifying animals.
That's a great point. But I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, something that goes back to the very beginning of our deep dive.
Okay.
We know from the reports that surfers spotted a massive 4.5-meter shark near Michaelmas Island the day before the fatal attack.
Right. One full day prior.
Exactly. In an era where we all have smartphones in our pockets, where social media connects us instantly, where we literally have satellite tracking on tagged sharks and drones patrolling coastlines, how is there still such a fatal disconnect in communication?
That is the big question.
Could a simple, unified warning system, something that seamlessly bridges the gap between a surfer's terrifying sighting on a Friday and a family's innocent dive trip on a Saturday, be the key to preventing the next tragedy? Because until we figure out how to share what we see out there off the trail, the wilderness will always have the upper hand. Thank you for joining us on this exploration.
Okay, one question for you. Why are authorities warning tourists, surfers and divers to remain cautious around the island following the fatal shark attack off the WA coast? Don't forget to comment it. Thanks.